Single mom, seamstress, adopted twin babies, until their real father returned as a CEO. Rain had fallen for 3 straight days over the small town of Riverbend. The swollen river crawled closer to the houses, and the streets glistened under the dim yellow lights that flickered with each gust of wind. Inside a narrow shop with a hand-painted sign that read Pearl Stitch Atelier, Mira Dalton was sewing the final seam of a wool coat. Her hands moved carefully, guided by years of habit. Across the table, her 7-year-old son Jamie sat with colored pencils, sketching a little jacket with mismatched buttons. "For winter," he said proudly, looking up at her. Mira smiled, tired but soft. "Then we'll make it together." The walls trembled as thunder cracked overhead. The power blinked twice before going out, leaving the small room lit only by the orange glow of a single oil lamp. Mira sighed, setting her needle aside. "That's it for tonight, sweetheart. Go get your blanket." Jamie started toward the back room, but stopped, his head tilted. "Mom, do you hear that?" At first, she thought it was the rain tapping against the window panes, but then she heard it too, faint, uneven, and desperate. A cry, not the wind, a child. Mira grabbed her lantern and opened the door. The wind hit her like a wave, biting and cold. "Jamie, stay inside," she called, though he was already clinging to her apron. The narrow street was half flooded, water streaming past like a silver ribbon. The cries grew louder. Mira lifted the lantern toward the sound, and there, caught between the railing and the front step, floated a small wicker basket wrapped in soaked fabric. "Oh, dear God," she breathed. She knelt, hands shaking as she pulled the basket toward her. Inside were 2 newborns, swaddled in blankets embroidered with tiny pearl buttons. One baby whimpered weakly, the other barely stirred. Mira touched their faces, ice cold. "Jamie, go get the dry towels," she shouted. The boy dashed back inside, returning with armfuls of cloth. They rushed to the back room, laying the babies near the oil stove. Mira worked quickly, drying them, checking their breaths. One tiny chest rose unevenly, and panic surged through her. "Breathe, sweetheart," she whispered, rubbing the baby's back until a thin cry escaped its lips. Relief flooded her eyes with tears. She noticed something tucked beneath the blanket. A half-soaked train ticket and a note, ink smeared but still legible. "Hold them safe." That was all. No names, no explanation, just those 3 words. Jamie sat beside her, eyes wide, his wet hair clinging to his forehead. "Mom, who left them?" "I don't know," she said, brushing a trembling hand over the babies' heads. She glanced toward the silent telephone. The lines were dead. The road outside was cut off by water. "I'll take them to the hospital in the morning," she murmured, though she already knew the nearest clinic had been evacuated hours ago. One of the babies started to cry again, tiny fists waving. Jamie reached out instinctively and held the baby's hand with his finger. "They're holding on, Mom," he whispered. "If something's broken, we can fix it, right? You always say we can sew things back together." Mira froze, the words sinking into her like a thread pulled tight through fabric. She looked at her son, her own reason for surviving the years after her husband walked away, and then at the 2 fragile lives in front of her. "We don't have much, Jamie," she said quietly. "But maybe we have enough to love them." The storm raged outside, rattling the windows, but inside the little shop the sound of rain softened into rhythm. With the gentle hum of the sewing machine, she started again. Mira cut a strip of flannel, stitching a small patch on each blanket, sealing the torn edges. When she finished, she looked at the 3 children curled together near the stove. Her son, his arms protectively around the twins. The lantern flickered, its flame steadying at last. Mira pressed a hand to her heart and whispered, "From now on, we'll keep them warm. We'll keep them safe." The night carried on, fierce and endless. But inside Pearl Stitch Atelier, a single mother with calloused hands sat awake, listening to the breath of two babies who had come from nowhere, and to the soft, steady beat of a family being sewn together for the first time. The floodwaters finally receded a week later, leaving the streets of Riverbend streaked with mud and broken branches. Mira had reported the discovery to the local police and social services, who came with clipboards and polite uncertainty. There were no missing child alerts, no families looking for newborn twins, and the note, "Hold them safe," offered no clue. "You can care for them temporarily," one officer said, glancing at her small shop. "We'll keep searching." Mira nodded, though she knew deep down no one would come. She filled out the forms with trembling hands while Jamie stood nearby, holding one of the babies in his arms. "I can help, Mom," he said, and he did. He helped every single day. The following months were a blur of sleepless nights and soft cries. Mira stitched while the twins slept in baskets near her sewing table. The air always filled with the smell of fabric, milk, and soap. She named them Ivy and Isla, names that sounded gentle, like things that could grow. They were tiny at first, fragile as pressed flowers, but they grew stronger. Ivy had a quiet, dreamy way of staring at the window light, while Isla laughed easily and reached for anything that sparkled, especially the pearl buttons Mira used on her dresses. Jamie loved them fiercely. He would rock their cradles with his foot while doing his homework, or whisper stories about the flood fairies who must have sent them to the shop. Sometimes, when the nights felt too long, Mira would watch all three children sleeping and whisper to herself, "We'll be okay." We're a patchwork family, but we fit. Over time, the shop began to fill with life again. The townspeople admired Mira's courage, how she'd rescued two babies from the storm, and soon she had more customers than before. Women from the community would drop by with fabric scraps or milk, saying, "You're doing a good thing, Mira. God bless you." The police stopped visiting after a few months. The file went quiet. And 6 months later, after endless paperwork and interviews, Mira Dalton was declared the legal guardian of Ivy and Isla. On the morning the papers were signed, Jamie came running into the shop with a drawing clutched in his hand. "Look," he said, out of breath. "It's our family!" The picture showed a small house with 4 stick figures, Mira at the sewing machine, Jamie with a wooden toy, and 2 little girls sleeping under a blanket dotted with pearl buttons. Mira crouched down beside him and kissed his head. "That's perfect," she whispered. Years passed, slow and beautiful. The shop became more than a business. It was a home stitched together by love. Every morning, sunlight streamed through the windows, catching on the rows of colored thread. Mira worked at her sewing table, while the children played nearby. Jamie, now 11, carved small wooden buttons in the shape of hearts and stars. Ivy would line them up in color order, and Isla would hide them again, giggling until her sister chased her around the counter. Sometimes Mira would pretend to scold them. "My helpers are more trouble than customers." But her smile always gave her away. Money was tight, but they never went without warmth. Meals were simple: soup, bread, tea, but always shared at the same table, with laughter echoing against the walls. In winter, Mira would cut old cloth into quilts, patching them with scraps from her clients' dresses. "Every stitch carries a story," she told the kids, "and every story matters." Jamie loved to hear that. He would listen, chin in his hands, while his mother sewed by lamplight and told him tales about threads of fate and people finding each other in storms. One evening, as the twins sat on the floor playing with buttons, Ivy suddenly looked up. "Mommy," she asked softly, "where did we come from?" Mira froze. The needle paused midair. She looked at her daughter's wide, trusting eyes. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Then she put the needle down and knelt beside them. "You came from the rain," she said finally, her voice trembling but warm. "The night the world was falling apart. You arrived, and you stayed." Ivy blinked, as if weighing the words. Isla laughed, pressing a pearl button into Mira's palm. "Then this is our lucky button." Mira smiled, her throat tight. "Yes, sweetheart." Our luck began that night. Later, after the children fell asleep, Mira sat by the window with the same tattered blanket she had found years ago. The embroidery was worn, but the pearl buttons still gleamed faintly. She traced them with her fingers, wondering again who had made them and why they were left to drift into her life. Yet as the rain began again outside, she realized it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was inside these four walls. The sound of steady breathing, the laughter that filled her days, and the quiet certainty that love, like a well-made seam, could hold against anything. 4 years had passed since that night of the flood. The twins had turned 5, Jamie was 11, and Pearl Stitch Atelier had become a small but beloved corner of Riverbend. The townspeople trusted Mira's hands to repair not only torn seams, but also things that carried memories. A grandmother's shawl, a baby's christening dress, a husband's old jacket that still smelled like pine soap. She never turned anyone away. "Every stitch holds a story," she would say, and people smiled because they knew she meant it. In late spring, the mayor stopped by her shop with a letter in hand. "Mira, this is from Larkspur City," he said, adjusting his glasses. "They're hosting the Threads of Hope Fair this year. It's a charity fashion showcase supporting orphaned children. They're inviting small-town artisans to submit designs. I thought of you immediately." Mira froze mid-measurement, chalk still in her fingers. "Me?" she asked. The mayor chuckled. "Who else? You turned a flood into a family, didn't you?" That night, after putting the children to bed, Mira sat at her sewing table staring at the letter. Jamie came in quietly, a cup of tea in his hands. "You should go, Mom," he said. "You always wanted people to see what you can make." She looked at him, so grown and steady now. "It's a long trip, sweetheart. The city is different." "Then take us," he replied, matter of fact. "You'll have your models." He grinned, nodding toward the twins' room. A month later, the little family boarded a bus bound for Larkspur. It was the first time any of them had left Riverbend. The city dazzled the children. The glass buildings, the glowing signs, the endless movement. Mira held their hands tight as they entered the grand hall where the fair was held. Chandeliers sparkled overhead. Music floated through the air, and the walls were lined with mannequins wearing clothes made by designers from all over the country. She felt small but proud as she set up her humble collection. Dresses made from recycled fabric, each stitched with a single pearl button at the collar, a symbol of second chances. When the show began, Mira stood backstage, adjusting hems and smoothing ribbons while the twins twirled nearby in their matching white dresses. Jamie handed out leaflets to guests, his face flushed with excitement. "Mom, they love your work," he whispered. Mira smiled nervously, unaware that among the crowd in the front row sat a man who hadn't smiled in years. Elias Graydon, CEO of Graydon Textiles, had attended the event as one of the main sponsors. The fair's theme, Threads of Hope, had been his late wife's idea 5 years earlier, before the tragedy that took her life and their newborn twins. He had promised to keep funding the charity in her honor, though every year it reopened the wound. He was preparing to leave early, as he always did, when something caught his eye. 2 little girls were walking down the runway hand in hand, wearing simple white dresses that shimmered under the light. Their hair was golden, their steps unsteady but full of joy. Around each of their necks hung a tiny pearl button sewn onto a ribbon. Elias's breath hitched. The world seemed to stop moving. He leaned forward, his heart pounding as memories he had buried came flooding back. The nursery his wife had painted, the unfinished embroidery she had left on the rocking chair, the small design of twin pearl buttons she had once called our family mark. The audience clapped politely, but Elias barely heard it. His hands trembled against his knees. When the girls turned at the end of the runway, he saw their faces clearly. Their smiles, the shape of their eyes, it was as if he were staring into the past brought to life. He stood abruptly, knocking his chair back. A few people turned, startled, but he didn't notice. His chest tightened painfully. He whispered his wife's name without meaning to. Celeste. Mira was backstage when she heard the commotion. She peeked out, confused, and saw a tall man standing frozen near the center aisle, eyes wide, fixed on the twins. She didn't know who he was, but something in his expression made her pause. A mix of disbelief, grief, and longing. The girls came running off the stage, laughing. "Mommy, we did it!" Isla shouted. Mira knelt and hugged them, her heart full. When she looked up again, the man was gone. That night, in the small hotel room, the twins fell asleep quickly, clutching the ribbons around their necks. Mira sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker like distant fireflies. She couldn't shake the image of that stranger's face, the way he had looked at her daughters, not with curiosity, but recognition. Jamie stirred in his sleep, mumbling, "Mom, did you win?" Mira smiled faintly. "Maybe, sweetheart," she whispered. "Just not the way I expected." Across the city, Elias sat alone in his office. The photograph of his wife and missing daughters spread on the desk before him. For years he had been told the fire had taken everything, but now, staring at the picture and remembering the pearl buttons glinting under the lights, he felt the first fragile spark of hope. Maybe not everything had been lost after all. The morning after the fair, Riverbend was still half dreaming under the early fog when the bus returned from the city. Mira carried a sleepy Isla on her shoulder. Jamie held Ivy's hand, and the quiet hum of homecoming settled over them. The shop smelled of thread oil and lavender, exactly as they'd left it. Mira unpacked the dresses carefully, hanging each one on its hook. Yet her mind wouldn't rest. She kept seeing that man's face in the crowd, the way he'd looked at the twins like he'd seen ghosts wearing white. By late afternoon, the rain started again. Mira set the kettle on the stove while Jamie drew on the floor. The twins were making a castle out of fabric rolls when a soft knock came at the door. She assumed it was Mrs. Carter from next door, probably bringing back her mended curtains. But when she opened the door, she froze. It was him. Elias Graydon stood under the drizzle in a long charcoal coat, his expression guarded but fragile, as if one wrong word might make him shatter. "Miss Dalton?" he asked quietly. His voice carried an exhaustion that didn't match his elegant posture. Mira hesitated, one hand still on the doorknob. "Yes, can I help you?" He stopped, exhaling shakily. "I saw your work at the fair. I wanted to commission a piece." Mira blinked, unsure what to say. "A custom order?" "Yes, for a memorial event." His gaze flicked toward the sewing machine behind her, then toward the children's laughter echoing faintly from the back room. "May I come in?" His politeness disarmed her. She nodded slowly. "Of course." Inside, Elias removed his gloves carefully, eyes scanning the little shop. Threads of every color hanging like ribbons of light, sketches pinned to the wall, and a family photo of Mira with 3 children smiling in front of the shop. He stopped at that photo, something in his face breaking for just a second before he turned away. Mira set down 2 teacups, trying to ease the tension. "So, what kind of design are you thinking of?" she asked. Elias reached into his coat and unfolded an old piece of cloth. It was burned at one edge, the embroidery barely visible, but the pattern of twin pearl buttons was still intact. "I'd like this restored," he said softly. "It belonged to my wife." The sound of the twins' laughter faded. Mira's eyes dropped to the cloth, and her fingers instinctively brushed one of the buttons. It was identical to the ones she had found on the twins' blankets that night years ago. Her breath caught, but she kept her voice steady. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "I'll do my best to bring it back to life." As she measured the fabric, Elias watched her hands. They were steady, skilled, the kind of hands that had built a world from nothing. He noticed the children's drawings taped to the cabinet. One showed a river, another a basket with two tiny figures. The details struck him like lightning, and his composure cracked. "Those girls," he said quietly. "They're yours?" Mira looked up. "Yes, I adopted them after the flood." Her tone was calm, but her chest tightened. He nodded, swallowing hard. "How old are they?" "5, she replied. His fingers trembled slightly around his teacup. 5, he echoed. The number felt like a door creaking open to a memory he had locked away. Jamie stepped out from the back room then, holding a jar of buttons. "Mom, should I sort these by color?" Elias turned, startled. The boy smiled politely, freckles bright against his cheeks. "Hello, sir." Elias found himself smiling faintly, despite the ache in his chest. "You help your mother here?" "Always," Jamie said proudly. "She fixes everything. Clothes, toys, hearts sometimes." Mira flushed. "Jamie." But Elias only nodded. "I can see that." When he left that evening, he paused at the door. The rain had stopped, leaving the cobblestones shining. "Thank you, Ms. Dalton," he said, his voice low. "You've done more than you know." Mira watched him walk away. Her heart caught somewhere between curiosity and unease. She closed the door slowly, her reflection faint in the window pane. Behind her, the twins were still playing, humming to themselves. She touched the pearl buttons on the burned cloth he'd left behind and whispered, "Who are you, Mr. Graydon?" Across town, Elias sat in his car, staring at the photograph he always carried in his wallet. His late wife, Celeste, held 2 swaddled infants, their blankets embroidered with the same pattern he'd just seen in Mira's shop. His throat tightened as he whispered to the empty seat beside him, "I think I've found them." That night, Mira couldn't sleep. Every sound of rain seemed louder than usual. She opened the drawer where she kept the twins' old blankets and laid them beside the burned cloth. The patterns matched perfectly. The same hand, the same thread, the same story beginning to return from the ashes. For 2 days, Mira could barely focus on her stitches. Every time the needle dipped through fabric, her mind returned to the man who had stood at her door. His eyes, his questions, the cloth he'd left behind. The sound of the twins' laughter filled the shop as always, but underneath it all, a quiet unease threaded through her heart. That evening, when she tucked the children into bed, Jamie sat up suddenly. "Mom," he whispered, "that man from the other day, he looked like he wanted to cry. Did we do something wrong?" Mira smoothed his hair gently. "No, sweetheart. Some people carry memories that hurt to look at." Jamie frowned. "Then maybe we can fix him too," he said, half asleep. "Like you fix everything." Mira smiled faintly, but the words stayed with her long after he drifted off. The next morning, the bell above the shop door chimed again. Elias stood there holding a small box. He looked tired, as if he hadn't slept either. "Good morning, Ms. Dalton," he said. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." Mira wiped her hands on her apron. "Not at all. Come in." The twins were coloring at the corner table, whispering to each other and giggling. Elias's gaze softened immediately when he saw them. "They're lovely," he murmured. "You must be proud." Mira hesitated. "I am. They've been my light since the day they arrived." Something flickered in his expression. Sorrow, relief, disbelief all at once. He placed the box on the counter. Inside was a necklace. The pendant shaped like a small silver teardrop, with 2 tiny pearls embedded side by side. "It belonged to my wife," he said quietly. "She designed it after our twins were born. It was supposed to be their keepsake." Mira's breath caught. "Your twins?" Elias nodded, his voice breaking slightly. "They were 5 days old when the fire happened. I was out of town. By the time I returned, everything was gone. I buried what they told me were ashes, but I never stopped feeling wrong, like the story wasn't finished." He paused, looking at her. When I saw your girls on that stage, I knew. The room seemed to shrink around them. Mira looked toward Ivy and Isla, one humming softly, the other trying to braid her sister's hair, and the air in her chest turned heavy. Mr. Graydon, she whispered, I don't know what you're suggesting. He reached into his coat pocket and set a photograph on the table. It showed a woman smiling softly, holding two swaddled infants in blankets embroidered with pearl buttons. Mira's knees weakened. It was the same pattern. Those blankets, he said, voice trembling. I recognize your stitching. I saw it when I visited. The threads are identical. For a long moment, neither spoke. The clock ticked, steady and cruel. Finally, Mira said, I found them outside my shop after the flood. There was no name, no sign of who left them. I called every agency. No one claimed them. Her voice cracked as she met his eyes. They were dying, Mr. Graydon. I couldn't let them go. Elias stepped closer, the anguish in his face raw. You saved them, he said. You kept them alive when I couldn't. Jamie appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. Mom, what's happening? Mira turned, trying to steady her voice. It's okay, sweetheart. Go back to bed. But he shook his head. No. Are we going to lose them? The question hit her harder than anything. She knelt beside him. No one's losing anyone, she said, though her voice trembled. Jamie looked at Elias then, his brow furrowed. Are you their dad? Elias hesitated, then nodded slowly. I think I am. Jamie's small hands clenched into fists. But Mom's their mom, he said fiercely. She was first. The twins, sensing the tension, ran to Mira and clung to her legs. Elias knelt too, meeting Jamie's gaze. You're right, he said softly. She's the one who loved them when no one else did. That will never change. His words were gentle, but his eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Mira couldn't speak. She gathered all three children close, her hands trembling against their small backs. Elias rose, stepping back toward the door. I didn't come to take them from you, he said. I just needed to see the truth with my own eyes. He paused, looking once more at the children, then at her. But now that I know, I can't pretend I don't. After he left, the shop felt unbearably quiet. The rain began again outside, steady and relentless, the same as the night her life had changed years ago. Mira sat on the floor between the sleeping children, staring at the old photograph Elias had left behind. The faces in it, his wife, the babies, felt like pieces of a puzzle she'd never meant to solve but now couldn't ignore. She pressed her hand to her chest, whispering into the dark, what happens when love belongs to two families? Far across the town, Elias sat alone in his car, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. The lights of Riverbend blurred through the rain, and he whispered to himself, they're alive. My daughters are alive. But beneath that realization was a deeper ache, because he also knew that another woman had already sewn her heart into theirs. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of tension and sleepless nights. Mira's hands still worked the sewing machine, but her stitches trembled now. She avoided the newspapers and the whispers outside the shop. Yet word traveled fast in small towns. Someone had seen Elias Graydon's car parked near Pearl Stitch Atelier. Others had recognized him from the charity fair. Soon, headlines appeared online. Billionaire CEO discovers twin daughters alive in Riverbend. Cameras began circling. Reporters came knocking. Mira drew the curtains tight and tried to keep life normal for the children. But the quiet she'd once known had vanished. That week, Elias returned, not as the polite client with a memorial cloth, but as a man torn between truth and duty. He stood in her shop doorway, soaked from the rain, his voice low. Mira, the world knows now. I didn't want it this way. But the story leaked. His eyes carried exhaustion and guilt. The court called. There'll be a custody hearing. Mira felt the air leave her lungs. A hearing? She whispered. Elias, I never wanted to take them from anyone. I only wanted to love them. And you did, he said, voice breaking. That's the problem. You loved them so much. Now I don't know how to ask for what's mine. The hearing took place 3 days later in the county courthouse, under gray skies and flashing cameras. Inside, the room smelled of rain and paper. Mira sat at the wooden table, hands clenched together, while the twins waited with a social worker nearby. Jamie sat behind her, gripping her shoulder for courage. Across the room, Elias looked as if he hadn't slept in weeks. His lawyer spoke first, presenting DNA tests confirming the girl's parentage. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. But then Mira's lawyer rose, holding a different kind of evidence, a stack of photographs. These, she said softly, are the first 5 years of Ivy and Isla's lives. Every birthday, every scraped knee, every smile. Love is not in blood alone. Mira was called to speak. She stood slowly, her voice trembling. I didn't give them life, she began, but I gave them every morning since. I found them in the storm. No one came. I didn't see names or inheritance. I saw 2 babies who needed warmth, and I promised them they'd never cry alone again. She lifted her hands, showing faint scars from years of sewing. These hands made their first clothes. These arms held them through every fever. I may not share their blood, but every heartbeat I've had since that night belongs to them. Across the room, Elias looked down, fighting tears. When it was his turn, he stood and faced the judge without notes. I lost everything once, he said quietly. My wife, my children, my faith in the world. When I saw those girls again, it was like breathing for the first time in years. But I also saw something else, the mother they already had. He turned to Mira. She gave them what I couldn't, hope. The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge's eyes softened. What do you want, Mr. Graydon? The judge asked. Elias hesitated. I want what's best for them, he said. And maybe that's not me alone. The decision came hours later. Shared guardianship, under terms of cooperation. Elias would provide education, health, and stability. Mira would remain the girl's primary caregiver. Neither victory nor defeat, just a fragile balance built from love and loss. When the ruling was read, Mira exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Jamie squeezed her hand hard enough to make her smile. Across the room, Elias met her eyes with quiet gratitude. Outside, rain fell again. Reporters called out questions, cameras flashing. Elias stepped forward, shielding Mira and the children with his umbrella. No statements, he said firmly. Just a family going home. They walked together to her old blue van, the twins skipping in puddles. Ivy reached up to catch a raindrop, giggling. Mommy, it's just like the night you found us. Mira's throat tightened. She knelt and kissed her daughter's foreheads. Yes, my loves, the rain brought you to me once. Maybe it's bringing us all together again. Later that night, after the house had gone quiet, she sat by the window, staring out at the wet streets. She thought of Elias, his silence in court, his choice to protect rather than claim, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. She opened the drawer and took out the silver teardrop necklace he had given her earlier, the one with 2 tiny pearls side by side. She held it in her palm and whispered, "Some things can't be owned. They can only be loved." Across town, Elias stood alone on his balcony, rain washing the city lights into soft blurs. In his pocket was a photograph, Mira and the children outside the courthouse. For the first time in years, he smiled without pain. The storm had taken everything from both of them, but somehow, love had stitched it all back together. The weeks after the court hearing moved quietly, as if the whole town of Riverbend had exhaled at once. The cameras left, the reporters found new stories, and life began to settle into something that almost felt normal again. The sign above Mira's little shop still read Pearl Stitch Atelier, but now, Beneath it, a new line of gold letters shimmered in the sun. Graydon and Dalton Children's Fund, where hope is sown by hand. It had been Elias's idea, though Mira insisted his name appear smaller than hers. "You're the reason the world knows what love looks like," he told her, but she only smiled. "I'm just the needle, Elias. You were the thread that found its way back." The arrangement between them unfolded naturally, not as a contract but as something living. Elias visited Riverbend every weekend, learning the rhythms of the children's laughter, the smell of fabric softener and tea, the way Mira hummed softly while sewing. He built a small reading corner in the shop, filled with picture books and story quilts stitched with the twins' drawings. Jamie, ever the protective big brother, began calling him Mr. E at first, then simply Eli. By summer, the children called him Dad, without hesitation, and Mira didn't correct them. The word fit, like a seam long meant to be. One golden morning, the shop buzzed with warmth and light. Ivy and Isla were helping sort colorful threads into jars, while Jamie tested a new display stand he'd built from scrap wood. Mira worked by the window, finishing a pale blue dress commissioned for a graduation ceremony. Elias arrived with a box in his arms. "What's this?" Mira asked, wiping her hands. He opened it carefully. Inside lay a restored version of her old sewing machine, the one she'd used the night she found the twins. Its iron gleamed. Its brass nameplate had been polished to reveal faint engraving. Pearl Stitch, 2008. He'd repaired it in secret, replacing broken gears with new ones, and adding a small silver plate at the base. Mira bent closer and read the words etched there. "For the woman who stitched us all back together." Her throat tightened, eyes glistening. "You didn't have to." "I did," Elias said softly. "Because you never asked for anything, and yet you gave everything." That evening, the town gathered for the first Stitched by Grace Community Fair, a charity sewing class for foster families. Lanterns hung from the trees, children laughed, and music floated through the summer air. Mira led the workshop with Elias by her side, guiding small hands through fabric and thread. "Pull gently," she told the little ones. "When you stitch too fast, the fabric tears. But if you're patient, the thread learns to trust you." Her voice carried, calm and sure, and Elias watched her the way one watches light after years of shadow. As the sun dipped, Ivy and Isla stood before the crowd, wearing white dresses dotted with tiny pearl buttons. Jamie handed them a small wooden box. "Mom," Ivy said shyly, "we made something for you." Mira knelt, opening the box. Inside were two small hand-sewn hearts stitched together, pink thread crossing in the middle. "It's us," Isla explained proudly. "You taught us how to sew, so now we can keep you close even when we're big." Mira's tears fell before she could speak. She pulled them into her arms. "You'll always be my little stitches," she whispered. When the fair ended, the crowd lingered under the twinkling lights. Elias stood beside her, watching the children run through the grass. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think family was something fate gave you, but maybe it's something you build, with enough courage to love what isn't perfect." Mira looked up at him, smiling. "Then we're proof of that." He nodded, eyes warm. A perfect patchwork. Later that night, when the house was quiet, Mira sat by the old sewing machine, tracing the new silver plate with her fingers. The lanterns outside still glowed faintly through the curtains. On the table lay the children's stitched hearts, their threads shining under the lamp. She thought about that first stormy night, the cries, the fear, the promise she'd whispered. Now those same threads had led her here, to laughter, to peace, to something stronger than blood. Elias came to stand beside her, hands in his pockets. "Couldn't sleep?" She shook her head. "I was thinking," she said softly, "about how strange it is, the way broken things find each other." He smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Maybe they're not broken. Maybe they were just waiting to be found." Outside, rain began to fall again, gentle, rhythmic, familiar. The twins stirred upstairs, murmuring in their sleep. Mira leaned against Elias, listening to the sound that had once brought sorrow, but now only peace. "The rain's back," she whispered. "Yes," he said, squeezing her hand. "But this time, it's home." The camera of the world might have moved on, but in that little house above Pearl Stitch Atelier, 4 hearts and a thread of grace had built something unshakable. A family stitched by love, one seam at a time. And as always, Mira's final words, spoken softly into the quiet night, became the moral of her story. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes that love can mend what life has torn.